Now let's talk with John Killinger. John, always a joy to have you on the program, and thank you for sharing that touching story about compassion with us today.
Thank you.
The personal stories that you bring are always very moving. I wanted to start our discussion today with how you started your message. You talked about spirituality versus belonging to a religion, and you have written about religion for many years in this country. What do you make of this trend of people wanting to be spiritual but not religious?
I think part of it is just the desire to leave behind the baggage of religion. As people have become more widely educated about how their own religions came into existence, I think they realize that a lot of that was made by other persons like themselves. And many of our churches, and I'm sure it's the same is true in other religions, have evolved through a series of committee meetings, if nothing else. And I think people look at the things that we do wrong in our various religious organizations, and they think, I don't want to be tarred with that brush. So if I could just be spiritual without that, then that's what I'd like to be.
So John, if they choose that course and they say, all right, I'm going to be spiritual and not religious, what do they miss out on by not being a part of a community of faith? Do they miss out on anything?
I think so. I think, granted that this community of faith is available to them where they are, where they live, and that there are people who are loving and kind, I think the nurturing of the community is extremely important in the life of religion. And, you know, I'm sure the three of us would be able to testify that we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this today if it weren't for some community that had helped us to find love and acceptance and made it possible for us to say to others, you need this too. But at the same time, we have to admit that all of our organizations are human and fallible, and that sometimes God gets obscured in the way we behave, and therefore a lot of people say, well, I don't want anything to do with that. I can be spiritual on my own. And so there's a kind of privacy that they seek in their religion.
And yet I was so struck by the doctor in the earlier segment who would never have done what she did. She said, were it not for the Baha'i community that had supported her and taught her these lessons.
Right.
I wonder what you said about spirituality being shared and not owned, and if we could talk about that a little bit more, because it's a very compelling statement. Expand on that a little bit for us. What?
Well, I think, Daniel, that it's very tempting to want to control our spirituality and to do it only by ourselves. We can do that the way we do yoga or exercise or something else. Of course, for a lot of people, that means you don't really get around to doing it. But there is this temptation always to want to be alone with the alone, as the mystics used to say. But the problem with that is that our lives are lived in communication with others, even when we don't want them to be. Even the loneliest curmudgeon is somehow connected to the rest of the world. And we're more and more aware of those connections today than people ever were. I mean, in globalization, that old story about the butterfly that lands on a plant across the world somewhere, moving the world where we are, is very true, that we are connected with one another, and we ought to own that, and if possible, try to be spiritual together. There's probably a lot more safety in our journey if we do that. That is, we're not as likely to do something really just silly or outlandish or that misses the mark as completely if we share it with other people.
Mm-hmm. You've spoken to us about the importance of compassion. I'd love to ask you to say a word about your new book. I mean, it sort of deals with the economic hard times that so many Americans are going through, and one congregation's response to that and that butterfly effect. Could you tell us something about it?
Well, the book is called The Zacchaeus Solution. And it's a novel about a minister and his wife who sort of kick it off by when they need to get rid of a couple of staff members because the church can't afford them. They talk about it and decide to give half of all their savings to the church, and it makes it possible to keep the staff members and not put them out of work. And some other people in the church learn about this, and it provokes what they call the Tuesday night meeting, where people who want to come together and talk about what they have and what they could do for others. And a whole series of reactions occurs then, and eventually the news of this spills out of the church into other churches in the community, out of the community, it becomes worldwide almost. And in the end, President Obama even gives the minister, in behalf of all of those who have done this, a new medal that has been struck by the president and his office called the Lincoln Medal. He treasures Lincoln so much, you know, and it is to thank all of these people who have started a movement to help others during a time when almost nothing else seems to help very much.
So this is one of the new books, and we mentioned the other one earlier in the broadcast, Hidden Mark, Exploring Christianity's Heretical Gospel. Let's talk a little bit about that as well, because you're a busy man, John. We're always impressed every year.
Well, you'd like to know a little bit about Hidden Mark?
Absolutely.
Well, the whole idea of Hidden Mark is that I think I've discovered some literary relationships among certain stories in the early chapters of Mark, those that encircle the two occasions when Jesus calmed the sea, that if you read them a certain way, and I try to help the reader to see this, then those two stories about calming the sea actually become post-resurrection stories. That is, they are stories of Jesus coming to the aid of his church. People who are in a boat. The boat, of course, was one of the early symbols of the Christian church. And they're out in a storm, and he comes to them, or in one case he's in the boat with them, in the other he comes walking across the water to them, and he calms the sea. And I think it was Mark's way of saying to an imperiled early church, look, the Master is here, we don't need to be afraid. As Jesus says to them, take heart, it is I, don't be afraid, you know.
John, I'm struck by, we're talking about one book which is a scholarly, exposition about the Gospel of Mark, and this one's a novel, and you've written over 70 books. What drives you to do that? What fuels you as a writer?
That's an interesting question. I love doing it, and it's an expression. I wanted to be an artist when I was a boy, and to express myself in visual images, and I don't know, I didn't get to do that because I became a minister and didn't have time to do that, but I guess I do have time to express it with words, which is maybe the answer.
Wonderful. We have a little bit of time left. What do you make of what's going on in the country right now? I know you love the news and you follow it quite closely.
Well, I think we're in a terrible period right now when we've talked about compassion today, and I think we've lost our sense of compassion for people who aren't like us. And this is true at the political level, it's true at the interfaith level. We've just lost our bearings for a time. I have a lot of faith in human nature. I think eventually we'll be led back to the way, and I hope we will. But right now, I think all of us who, people may be watching this program, and all of us who are involved in this together need to think what we can do to be more generous to others and more giving and forgiving so that there can be more of a sense of unity in God's world.
Well, your message today on compassion couldn't be more timely. Thank you so much for being with us.